What is up, GHS or anyone on YouTube? This is Mr. Tharp. Today we are going to answer a roadmap question on the early Cold War. So this is for you guys to use to answer your roadmap questions, to review for a test, or maybe your teachers want to use it for a review. However, anybody wants to use it, I hope you find value because I just love talking and learning about history. So the first thing you need to understand is this picture represents the Cold War that you see. The Cold War is going to include almost every aspect of life. The governments aren't going to be against each other. The military, there's going to be a space race. Sports even is going to come and be affected by the Cold War. Culture, entertainment. So it's called a Cold War because no one's physically shooting missiles or bullets at each other, but they're kind of trying to position or fight each other in every aspect of life. And whoever was the best, whoever won the culture or the ideology or the thoughts was kind of going to win the day. So that is kind of just a big overview of what the Cold War is. Let's look at the question we're going to answer on our roadmap. Describe the factors that contributed to the Cold War between the Soviet Union, a lot of people will say Russia, even though that's just one country or part of the Soviet Union, it still exists today, and the US before, during, or after World War II. So let's first start with comparing capitalism and communism because we have to understand what those are to understand this whole Cold War thing. Like, what's the problem? What's the issue? So another thing I want to point out is this Cold War, it's going to affect everything we study for the rest of the year. Okay? So we're going to get into the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the space race, the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's going to be some wars in Afghanistan and the falling of the Berlin Wall in '89. And then it's going to keep going. So understand you have to get this Cold War concept down to understand everything we're going to do for the rest of the year. So a really quick breakdown of capitalism versus communism. Capitalism is the idea that there's a free market economy. If you guys remember laissez-faire, meaning hands-off, when we studied earlier in the year, that's the idea there, is that let the people decide. So the government is, for the most part, going to let people have freedom. Who decides the price, supply, and demand? It's the people. The businesses decide how much they're going to make, what they're going to make, and what they're going to sell it for. In communism, they have what's called a command economy because the government commands them what to do. Now, their goal here is that supposedly, in theory, this will make it so that everyone's equal because you won't have different outcomes like in capitalism where we have rich and poor people. That doesn't really happen in reality, but many people today still think it can. So then the government's going to control and own the business. They will then decide how much we make, and what we sell it for. It typically, historically, has ended up with a lot of shortages of goods, whereas capitalism produces an excess of goods. But again, that can be debatable. Here's a more in-depth look at capitalism versus socialism or communism. I'm not going to get into that, but if you want to pause it and kind of look at those, you can kind of see the difference. Now, some people might say, well, who cares about this? It's all in the past. What difference does it make? I would argue that is very much not the case. What Marxism has done is kind of change its form from the haves and have-nots or rich versus poor and gone to something called identity politics in the form of critical theory, which is pretty much taught in every major university in America. So they extended Marxism or Marxist theory, and they incorporated elements and other intellectual traditions as critical theory. So if you study history, any of the arts, so what Marxism did is kind of change the way that it presents itself. Instead of it just being a class struggle of the rich versus the poor, they use some critical theory. A neo-Marxist idea now uses the idea of identity politics. So it uses people's sex or race or gender or lots of other things to divide them and essentially tear down society. Another thing that is happening is millennials are very much in favor of socialism, so much so that 70% of them say they would like to vote for a socialist. So Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have made this very popular with young people. And I have this as a very interesting one. 19% of millennials think the Communist Manifesto better guarantees freedom and equality for all than the Declaration of Independence. So don't just fall for this, oh, well, communism's dead, it doesn't matter. Communism is very much alive and well and being debated in our academic circles today. So we have covered capitalism and communism. Now let's look at what is democracy. We want to understand what that means. So in a democracy, the people decide. That's the easiest way to put it. In an autocratic government, essentially there's one person in power or one political party. So basically you're just told this is your government. So we can see this is it's all equal here when World War II's done, and communism's spreading, okay? And we're going to talk about something called the Domino Theory, where people thought like, oh, all these countries are becoming communist or autocratic. That's a really bad thing. And the democratic governments are going down. And then things kind of start to switch. And you can see this is kind of like a summary of the Cold War and what happened. So a democracy, the people choose versus the government deciding what is good for you. All right, so we're going to actually start here because this is going to explain to us how this whole Cold War starts from World War II. The Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. So let's see what that was. So this is from history.com, the Non-Aggression Pact. So with Europe on the brink of another major war, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin viewed the pact as a way to keep his nation on peaceful terms with Germany while giving him time to build up the Soviet military. German Chancellor Adolf Hitler used the pact to make sure Germany was able to invade Poland unopposed. The pact also contained a secret agreement in which the Soviets and Germans agreed how they would later divide up Eastern Europe. So let's look at this. So here is Russia. Germany is right here, blue. So they basically said, hey, Hitler said, I just want to fight a one-front war. He signs an agreement with Russia. They say, we won't attack each other. We'll split up this land later. Okay, sounds good. Now, Hitler's big mistake is he is going to end up attacking Russia, starting the two-front war. The German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact fell apart in June when Nazi forces invaded the Soviet Union. So Hitler, again, goes back on his word. Now, but this made people in America and England not trust the Soviet Union because they made this deal with Germany. So that's the first reason we need to know that they do not trust them. The second one then is after we have something called the Yalta Conference. So the Yalta Conference helped lead to the Cold War by giving the Soviet Union control over Eastern Europe. At the conference, the Soviet Union was given the right to control Eastern Europe. This led to the Cold War because it made the West feel that the USSR was bent on expanding communism. So here's a great example. So the Soviet Union kind of takes all this land after World War II. And right here, now the Iron Curtain is just an imaginary thing. It's not an actual wall other than the Berlin Wall, but the Iron Curtain, this is kind of how people viewed it in their minds. Okay, this guy is yelling capitalist pig. He's the communist yelling at these guys. These are representing poor people trying to escape the Iron Curtain. But this here kind of divided the world, kind of going back to where we were here, right? This is the Iron Curtain, okay? That the Soviet Union was controlling people and having an autocratic government versus a democracy. Now, one thing you have to understand here is this is Germany right here. So it's divided up after World War II. Of course, this is again because of the Yalta Conference. And each major country gets its area. But see, this is Berlin. This is a city, the capital city of Germany. Now, that city was then divided up into different areas. So you have these little democracies are basically like islands surrounded by all this communism. And that's going to come in play later. We'll talk about it more. But you need to understand there's a city inside surrounded by all these communists where these countries are free. So think about it. Democracy, autocracy, command economy, communism, capitalism. And they're surrounded by that. Okay? So that's going to be a big deal that's going to lead to this Cold War. So this is a very famous picture. This is Winston Churchill, who was the leader of Great Britain. This is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the leader of the United States. This is Joseph Stalin, the leader or dictator of Russia or the Soviet Union. So we have talked about the Iron Curtain, talked about Berlin, Germany, Stalin. Truman is going to take over for FDR. He's going to be the president to kind of get this whole Cold War thing going when he is president. So I think that's it. So as you guys listen to this, I hope that helps you write your roadmap question. Look at my other videos if you want to kind of have a 1, 2, 3 step process as to how to answer this. If you need any help, please reach out or just leave a comment down below if you're not one of my students. Everyone have a great day and hope this helps you understand the Cold War. Peace.